lesson today is David's sin and punishment. And as we know, David was a wonderful man of God. He wrote a lot of the book of Songs. And in that book of Songs is a lot of his feelings and things that he had been through in life. Today is Sunday. In our Sunday school, we thank Minister Arthur for our superintendent and Sister Viola Kitchen for our director of Christian education and our pastor, Suffolk and Bishop Levelton J. Daniel. Our golden text, wherefore hast thou despised the commandment of the Lord, to do evil in his sight? Thou hast killed Uriah, and hast taken his wife to be thy wife. That's 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 9. We're going to begin by reading our lesson, and you all can certainly follow along. 2 Samuel 11:2. And it came to pass in the evening time that David arose from off his bed, and he walked up on the roof of the king's house, and from the roof he saw a woman washing herself, and the woman was very beautiful to look upon. And David sent and inquired after the woman, and said, Is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Elam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? And David sent messengers, and took her. And she came in unto him, and he laid with her, for she was purified from her uncleanness, and she returned unto her house. And the woman conceived, and sent and told David, and said, I am with child. And it came to pass in the morning that David wrote a letter to Joab, and sent it by the hand of Uriah. And he wrote in the letter, saying, Set ye Uriah in the forefront of the hottest battle, and retire ye from him, that he may be smitten and die. And it came to pass, when Joab observed the city, that he assigned Uriah unto a place where he knew that violent men were. And the men of the city went out and fought with Joab, and they fell some of the people of the servants of David, and Uriah the Hittite died also. Then Joab sent and told David all the things concerning the war. We're going to jump down to verse number 26. And when the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah, her husband, was dead, she mourned for her husband. And when the morning was past, David sent and fetched her to his house, and she became his wife, and bare him a son. But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. Forgiveness does not mitigate punishment. So we're now in 2 Samuel, the 12th chapter, and the 13th verse. And David said unto Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. And Nathan said unto David, The Lord also hath put away thy sin. Thou shalt not die. Howbeit, because by this deed thou hast given great occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme, and the child also that is born unto thee shall surely die. And Nathan departed unto his house, and the Lord struck the child that Uriah's wife bare unto David, and it was very sick. Who is Nathan in the Bible? Nathan was a prophet in the Bible who lived during the reign of King David in Israel. God spoke to David through Nathan on several occasions. Nathan was a member of David's royal court and one of his closest advisors. There are several stories in the Bible featuring Nathan that occurred during some of the darkest and most emotional times in David's life. And we know that David had a lot of emotional times in his life. David's plan to hide the crime. In the previous chapters, Israel had been at war with the Amorites, but they had not completely defeated them. As chapter 11 begins, David sends the army to finish off the Amorites once and for all. David, however, he doesn't travel with the front lines. Instead, he stays home during the siege. One evening, as David walks around the roof of his palace, he sees a beautiful woman bathing on another roof. He sends word for her to come to the palace, and there he committed adultery. She quickly learns that she's pregnant, and she tells David. So, who is this woman? Before David even sends for her, he learns that she is Bathsheba, the daughter of Elon and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. In 2 Samuel, it says she was the daughter of one of David's best fighters, the granddaughter of his most trusted counselor, and the wife of one of his inner circles of honored soldiers. David is thus choosing to commit adultery and betray one of his most loyal followers. Since Bathsheba is pregnant, the only way to hide the secret is for David to entice Uriah to sleep with Bathsheba immediately, so that when the child is born, everyone will think it belongs to Uriah. Since Uriah is off fighting the Amorites, David summons him back to Jerusalem and encourages him to go back to his house to rest and rejuvenate. Surely, David thought, he will have intimate relations with his wife when he goes home, but that plan backfired. Instead, Uriah sleeps at the palace with the servants. So David gives him alcohol and gets him intoxicated, assuming that his drunkenness will cause him to go to his house and sleep with his wife. Again, the plan backfired. Uriah refuses to go home. So, why does Uriah refuse to go home? He hasn't been with his wife for a while, but he still decided, I'm not going home. Uriah's refusal to have a sexual contact with his wife at this time was clearly an expression of devotion to the Lord. All sanctioned military activity was a form of service to the Lord, and it required the Lord's blessing for success. In order to maximize the probability of receiving that blessing in military endeavors, David seems to have required soldiers carrying out military assignments to keep themselves in a state of purity, which necessarily meant refraining from all sexual contact. So we have several scriptures that refer to that. If Uriah had had sexual relations with Bathsheba, he would have rendered himself temporarily unfit for military service and thus unfit for the service of the Lord. So, as we see, Uriah was a dedicated soldier for David. Okay, what are some of the things which led to David? Occasions that led to the sin that David committed. Number one, he neglect of his business. When David should have been with his army in the field fighting for the battles, he decided to put this all this on his soldiers, let them go and do it. He himself decided he's going to stay home. He stayed home and tarried at Jerusalem. Had he been at his post like he was supposed to, at the head of the forces, he would have been out of the way of temptation. So while he's at home, he dozes off away the afternoon in idleness. And we know what idleness is. That's when the devil's workshop. Usually, David was a prayer warrior. He used to pray morning, noon, and night. You can read many of his songs. Says in the morning he prayed, in the evening he prayed, in the noontime he prayed. But this time he was idle. A wandering eye. He saw a woman. The sin came in at the eye, as Eve did. The steps of sin. When he saw her, lust immediately conceived, and he inquired who she was. The corrupt desire grew more violent, though he was told she was a wife and whose wife she was. Yet he sent messengers for her. And is that not sin? When somebody wants to sin, they don't care who they are. David knew this lady. He knew her husband but he still, that desire for lust, it controlled him. Since Uriah refused to sleep with Bathsheba, David, he starts a new plan to murder Uriah, which would allow David to legally take Bathsheba into his household as his human, as his kinsman, redeemer. David sends a message carried by Uriah to his general Joab. Joab is to the mount a risky assault close to the walls of Rabbah and make sure Uriah is part of the assault. So David was planning something. It's like, you know what? I want Uriah sending his own letter about his death. So what he's telling them to do is put Uriah at the front of the line, which surely Uriah will get killed, okay? So Joab, he does what David commands him to do. In the meantime, not only does he lose Uriah, but several other soldiers also die. Keep in mind that this assault was completely unnecessary as they had Rahab surrounded. Given enough time, the city would have surrendered without this useless attack on the city wall. And this is how the devil deceives us. He can deceive the very elect. So David now has committed adultery and murder. He commands to Joab, are directly responsible for the death of Uriah. Now, one question I wanted to ask people, do you think Joab was correct in following this leader? Now, this leader David was not right. Did Joab have to do this? That's a question at the end I'd like for you all to answer. Upon hearing of Uriah's death, Bathsheba, she mourns. After her mourning is over, she moves into the palace with David. How did David not arouse suspicions when he moved Bathsheba into his palace, married her, and then impregnated her? Come on now. Everybody in the neighborhood was talking. Come on now. So this is how the devil can trick us. How in the world did he not know people knew something was going on? That's the devil. Even though David may have fooled everyone else, he did not fool God. Chapter 11 ends with an anonymous note for David. But the thing David had done displeased the Lord. Now we're in the opening of chapter 12. The confrontation between God and David takes place through the prophet Nathan. Rather than arouse David of his sin, Nathan is wise. Nathan instead tells a story to incite David to accuse himself. Nathan tells the story of a rich man. He owns a large number of sheep and cattle, who steals the beloved lamb of a poor man who owns no livestock except the lamb, in order to feed a traveler who has traveled at the rich man's home. Upon hearing the story, David exclaims, "As surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this deserves to die. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over because he did such a thing and had no pity." And to which Nathan responds, "You are that man." Nathan then reveals the word of God that he received about David's evil deeds. God reminds David that he gave him the throne of Israel. He gave David everything that Saul possessed. He gave him all kind of concubines, and then he was going to bless David even more. But David murdered Uriah and stole his wife from him. The consequences that would follow are that David's own household would suffer tremendously. His wife and concubines would be taken by a family member, and the family member would publicly sleep with them. So what David did was in secret, but his punishment is gonna be in open. Everybody's gonna see that his wife was taken. All of his wives and concubines, they're gonna be taken. There would be a public rebellion against the reign of David from within his own household. Sin, there is a penalty for sin. Oh, yes. Even though David may have fooled everyone else, he did not fool God. And again, we know what chapter 11 ends with. So in verse 13, it says, David, unlike Saul, when confronted with his sin, simply stated, he didn't try to hide it. He said, I have sinned against the Lord. There was no excuses, no elaborate rationalizations, only heartfelt repentance. Note that even though David sinned against Uriah, his primary offense was sinning against God. By breaking God's commandment, thou shalt not commit adultery. In those days, the penalty for adultery and murder, it was capital punishment. David he should have been killed for this, committing adultery. Would the Lord take David's life? Nathan reassures David that his life would be spared, but the life of his son would be taken instead. God strikes the child with an illness. And David, he prays and he fasts that God would change his mind. And Lord, have mercy upon my son. David was praying day and night at this time. On the child's seventh day of life, the baby dies. When David hears of his son's death, he stops fasting. He washes himself, he puts on a change of clothes, and he eats a meal. His servants are confused at his actions. So he tells them, when the child was alive, I fasted, I wept, I thought, who knows, the Lord may be gracious to me and let the child live. Please, Lord, he was praying, let my baby live. But now that he is dead, why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I will go to him, but he cannot return to me. The aggravations of sin. Think about David. David was now in years, at least 50 years of age, which are more properly youthful, but one would think should not have been violated. You would think as a person get older, they get wiser. He had many wives and concubines. God had taken care of David. He had everything that he wanted. Uriah, whom he wronged, was one of his own, was a person of honor and virtue. This is the man that was sacrificed his life in honor of David. He loved David. He did anything for his king, for King David. Bathsheba, she was a lady of good reputation until she was drawn by David and his influence into his wickedness. The adulterer, when you commit adultery, not only is it wrong, it runs not only you, but it runs other people's life. Think of the other people that were affected by the sin that David and Bathsheba committed. Okay, and then I wanted to go into the heart. The heart. Why is the heart so important to God? And we hear that all the time. David was a man after God's own heart. So I decided to look up, see a picture of the heart. If you see the heart, it's in the middle. It's in the middle. The heart is a vital organ that pumps blood throughout the body, providing oxygen and nutrients to the cells. However, in the Bible, the heart is also a metaphor for the innermost part of the person, where emotions, thoughts, and desires reside. The heart is considered the seat of the soul and the source of the person's moral character. In Proverbs 4:23, it is written, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. This verse emphasizes the importance of keeping our hearts pure and free from evil thoughts and desires. God cares about the condition of our hearts because it is the foundation of our relationship with Him. In Ezekiel 36:26, God promises to give us a new heart, put a new spirit within us, renewing our heart of stone and giving us a heart of flesh. This new heart is one that is pure, holy, and in line with God's will. The heart and the mind, it works together in our relationship with God. We are saved through faith. The mind and the heart must both engage in this process, because to have faith, we must believe and trust God. Believing requires the mind, but to trust someone, it requires the heart. In summary, the heart is important to God because it is the center of our being and the source of our of our moral character. It is the gateway to our relationship with God, and a pure heart is essential for a healthy and fruitful spiritual life. Why was David considered a man after God's own heart? And I had to think about this. I had to ponder this because I thought what he did it was terrible. It was terrible. The man that he was going to kill wanted to die. He sent the letter by the man who was going to die. And I thought, oh my goodness, how cold. But everything that David did, David repented. It wasn't not a repeat offense. So David was considered a man after God's own heart because of his faithfulness and his obedience to God. In Acts 13:22, it is written that God testified concerning him. I have found David, son of Jesse, a man after my own heart. He will do everything I want him to do. No, David was not perfect, but he had a deep love for God and a desire to follow his commandments. He was also a man of prayer and worship, as evidenced by the many songs that he wrote. David was not bitter. David, though, was rejected by his father and brothers as, as the least of all, did not function in bitterness. His heart, again, the heart was pure. Every opportunity he got, he served his brothers. He did so without any ill feelings towards them. Now, he could have had some ill feelings, but he did not. King Saul, on the other hand, lived and grew in insecurities and did not deal with them. A bitter heart produces bitter fruits. Let us learn, we have to learn to let go of any bitterness. Number two, David was a worshiper. One beautiful thing about David was that all through his life, he had been a passionate worshiper. A private worshiper never hesitates to worship his God in public. The reason is simple. Worship is the overflow of your relationship of who God is. The greater the revelation of who God is, the more it will make you bow down and worship God. God is drawn to worshipers. And number three, David was hardworking and committed. Interestingly, God looks at a man's commitment and passion in the natural before using him in spiritually. David was a dedicated shepherd boy. He was dedicated to the work. He was not lazy. Whatever he was supposed to do, he did it. He was obedient to his leader. And these are some of the qualifications that God looks at. He looks at what we do. Like they say, your gift will make room for you. David had gifts, but guess what? He showed his compassion. He was humble. And God is looking for a servant that is humble and that is committed to whatever task that he has to do. If you're an usher and you do it with the goodness of God, if you are hospitality, if you are an office worker, whatever you do, God sees that and he honors that. And he honored David in his commitment as being a shepherd. Sin has no age limit. David, at this time, he was around 50 years old when he committed adultery with Bathsheba. And I was wondering, how old was he when he died? David died at the age of 70, and 70 to me is relatively young. And I looked at some of the other kings. We see that King Saul died at 72, and his son Jonathan, who was David's best friend, he died at the age of 57. So as we look at the age of David, and we said age has no limit, sin has no limit. The devil, he will deceive whoever he can deceive. You can be 99 years old, but if the devil can get into your mind, into your heart, he will do it. So we have to protect our heart. And as we know about David, he wrote many songs. A song of David when Nathan the prophet came into him after he had gone to Bathsheba. And we all know this one so much. It says, have mercy upon me, Oh God, according to thy loving kindness, according unto the multitude of thy tender mercies, blot out my transgressions. David wasn't hiding it. He knew he was wrong. He knew he had sinned. But in his heart, he said, God, forgive me. He said, wash me thoroughly from my iniquity. Cleanse me from my sins. And we can ask God every morning, God, take it out. Anything you see that's not like you, search my heart. That song says, search my heart. If you find anything that shouldn't be, take it out. And then on verse 10, it says, create in me a clean heart, oh God. Renew a right spirit within me. It says, cast not away from thy presence. David knew, I need you, Lord. It says, I need you. Please don't go away from me. Please keep your presence. Please keep me, Lord, under your blood. Don't let that spirit go away from me, God. I need you, God. I need your protection every day. Take not thy Holy Spirit from me. David knew what he was talking about. He knew that if he didn't have the Lord on his side, he knew he would be nothing. So he's begging God, please, God, don't take away your presence from me. He said, restore unto me the joy of thy salvation and uphold me with thy spirit. And that is my presentation for today. Create in me a clean heart, O Lord, and renew a right spirit within me.